Hi there, my name is Amna and welcome to another video of Lingua ESL lessons. This video lesson is about perhaps the most celebrated person in the British history, an English playwright, poet and actor, widely known as the greatest writer in the English language and the world's greatest dramatist, the one and only William Shakespeare. He's often called England's national poet and Bard of Avon. His extant work include collaborations consist of some 39 plays, 154 sonnets, and 2 long narrative poems, and a few other verses, some of uncertain authorship. Doubts that William Shakespeare wrote the plays attributed to him were first expressed openly in 1850. Some critics say that hidden doubts were expressed right in 16th century, and that is to say immediately following the publication of his first 2 works that appear under the name of William Shakespeare. And to the best of our information, these 2 works were his 2 poems, Venus and Adonis and the Rape of Lucrece. We'll discuss this question that was Shakespeare really a writer of his own works or was it someone else? But before that, let me warn you that this is not a common or an ordinary academic subject. Some people get very upset about questioning of Shakespeare authorship question. You may find people getting angry on that, but I assure you that at least in this video lesson you'll find a place to see both sides of this dilemma, and I'll try to unfold this mystery. In late 1980s, this became a hot issue of debate. If I tell my personal experience, the Shakespeare Mystery Frontline show is 1980s documentary show, and for me it became an incredibly interesting food for thought. This show was hosted by Judy Woodruff, as you can see in the left picture. So on this debate of authorship, generally we find 2 groups of people in the world, Stratfordians and anti-Stratfordians. Stratfordians, as we guess by the name, believe that Shakespeare, beyond the shadows of doubt, was the writer behind the Shakespearean plays, while anti-Stratfordians claim that he was not. And they not only claim, but also they highlight some recognized scholars from the history who also believe this. Every year, a good number of visitors and travelers come at annual procession to Shakespeare's monument. Stratfordians rejoice at this happy union in the memory of the greatest playwright of Stratford. The march from Shakespeare's birthplace to Stratford Church, where the monument lies, is a tradition that grows larger and larger every year. Shakespeare is buried in the church floor. But the dilemma and the mystery that I said I will try to unfold in this video is that among the million people who visit his monument, there are a few who come not to praise him, but just to stare at his monument with countless unanswered questions in their head. And one of them was Mark Twain, an opponent of the authorship of Shakespeare. Is Shakespeare Dead is a book by Mark Twain. So, according to Mark Twain, it always seemed unaccountable that a man could be so prominent in Elizabeth's little London as historians and biographers claims that Shakespeare was, and yet leave behind him hardly an incident for people to remember him by. Leave behind him nothing much but trivialities. Leave behind him little or nothing but the happenings of an utterly commonplace life. So during Mark Twain's life, the popular candidate for Shakespeare work was Francis Bacon. One might think that why would anyone believe that Shakespeare didn't write his work? There lies a variation of spelling of his name in the documents. One kind of spelling is without E after the K, or another is without an E at the end. It's very likely that the use of different spellings and signatures would be a casual trend in Elizabethan or Victorian era. A look at these 6 signatures. All seem to be written by different persons. The first 3 signatures are found in his will. So the concession point can be that It's quite possible that somebody else wrote them. None of them is his own. But there is a doubt. There is a big doubt, and the doubt is based on the fact that what we know of literary men in 17th century, they used to develop their own personal signatures. Also, in his will, he leaves no books, no documents with his signatures, and no manuscripts. As far as the musical instruments that we as Shakespearean readers expect he must have had used in his life, as we read in his plays, not even a single instrument can be found at his birthplace. If we look at the documents we have of Shakespeare's life, there are more than 60. None of them states that he was a writer. A big inference, though we have written evidence that he was a theatre shareholder. Doubts are getting closer to Shakespeare's home, as according to the records, the former British minister, author, and classical scholar Enoch Powell visited there, and after studying Shakespeare plays, convinced him that the town was built on a lie. A big statement. Nevertheless, it was the 400 years after his death, say out aloud. According to the Frontline show, Shakespeare Mystery, since his death in 1660s, over 4,000 books have been written about the so-called authorship question. Pupils in Elizabethan era were taught Latin, Greek, along with English in Stratford Grammar School. But the dilemma is, there is no documentary record that the Shakespeare ever went to school. So far we have discussed what the question means. It's a very mysterious subject. We learn about the Stratfordians and anti-Stratfordians and what is their respective point of view regarding Shakespeare and the man behind him. We talked about Mark Twain's objections on Bard of Avon's authorship. In this video we'll discuss the Stratfordians too, but before that we have a few more things to discuss regarding anti-Stratfordians' claim. All the manuscript that tells the hard facts about Shakespeare after he left Stratford for London are found in London's public record. Among them, there is only one that tells us about Shakespeare was paid as an actor is being disputed among the scholars. When he died in 1616, no one seemed to notice his death. It was only 7 years later that the first folio appeared in which Ben Jonson wrote a poem in his memory calling him "O Sweet Swan of Avon." And yes, this was the first publication of all his plays after his death. During the same period, Shakespeare's monument was built in the church. Sweet swan of Avon, what a sight it were, to see thee in our waters yet appear. My Shakespeare rise, and I will not lodge thee by Chaucer or Spenser or bid Beaumont lie a little further to make thee a room. When the first folio of Shakespeare's work was published in 1623, 7 years after his death, Ben Jonson, who was a fellow writer, noted that Shakespeare was not of an age but of all the times. The statement can be taken two ways: that the meaning of Shakespeare's work is always the same, or that it's always different. If not Shakespeare was the writer of the plays, then who was the man behind it? What anti-Stratfordians claim? 1920 was the year when a schoolmaster, J. Thomas Looney, published a book Shakespeare Identified, based on his 7 years of research on the subject. He identified a person who was very close to Elizabethan court and whose poems resembled that of Shakespeare's. This 17th Earl of Oxford, to the best of our information, literary critiques of the period call him one of the greatest Elizabethan poets. His name was Edward de Vere. One of the Looney's disciples suggests that de Vere would have published his work without his name on them. According to his disciple, this man, Edward de Vere, couldn't admit that he was also a playwright beside a poet. The Earl of Oxford died of plague in 1604. Stratfordians say that he could not have been the author of Shakespeare's plays, as at least one of the 37 plays of Shakespeare were written after 1604. We know nothing of his death, more than that his tomb was disappeared. It's a mystery, an enormous mystery. Stanfordian scholars dismiss all the theories that doubt Shakespeare based on historical and biographical evidence. But there is a way to test whether Shakespeare's works are his own or someone else's. It happened in the late 1800s. A Polish philosopher named Vincente Littowski designed a procedure called stylometry. He applied the knowledge from linguistics to solve this mystery. So how does the stylometry work? Vincente believed that each writer's style has some unique features that remain fairly uniform in his writing. For example, the average sentence length, average repetition of words, or what we call the tightness of words in a line. The more technical term for this analysis is variance. Now to understand it, take an example that if enough works of Edward de Vere or Francis Bacon fall within Shakespearean variance, or if it is the other way around, we can conclude that Bacon and Shakespeare or de Vere and Shakespeare are the same person. But with this test, that was not the case. The result was that Shakespeare is none other than Shakespeare. Shakespeare certainly did have books, and he certainly read them. Then why are there no books with an authentic Shakespeare signature, bookplate, book label, or inscription? I would conclude the whole discussion on Shakespeare authorship with a psychological approach on that. I think it's a difficult debate, and like any other difficult debate, there are little bits of puzzle that people get wrong. Another concept that's interesting that fits here in this discussion is the concept of motivated reasoning. That's a concept from psychology, where it has been known for quite some time that when people become very passionate about something, they stop reasoning about it.